What's going on, everyone? This is the Noah Gillian Show, and I, of course, am your host, Noah Gillian. So happy you decided to join in today. It is the 22nd of August, 2023, and on today's episode, we're going to start continuing to talk about the 2023 fantasy football season and continue with our fantasy ranks for the upcoming season. Before we get into the show, please hit that subscribe button if you're joining us on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please give the show a like, a follow, 5-star review. Can really help the podcast grow in that way. You can also follow us all on social media. You can find all the handles in the description below. So let's just jump right into it. We got a packed show. Once again, on Spotify, Apple Music, give that 5-star review. Would really help the show grow. All right, everyone. Today we will be continuing through our positional rankings going into the 2023 season. And today we find ourselves at the running back position. These guys have traditionally been the cream of the crop of the fantasy community and the most valuable commodity for a fantasy manager. Saying that, the landscape has changed. A lot of people prefer stacking wide receivers now as we move into more of a passing league instead of a ground and pound type of offensive landscape. For me, however, the buck still stops with the running backs, and there's no position in fantasy more important than the running back position. And I think I'll start there just because I think that what we really need to remember with the running back position is the positional scarcity. That is the buzzword or words when it comes to the running back position is positional scarcity. Every team only starts one running back, and every team starts two wide receivers. So you're already talking about 32 starting running backs in the NFL, and you're talking about 64 starting wide receivers in the NFL. So all of a sudden, if we just scale that back to, for fantasy purposes, if you're in a 12-team league, right? Let's say the top 24 teams or whatever, because that means every team would have a running back 1 and a running back 2. You're talking about 24 as opposed to 48 wide receivers, because it's just doubled in terms of there's 24. The top 24 NFL teams start one running back in terms of their fantasy points per game. And then those same teams in terms of the wide receivers have 48 because they're starting two guys, everyone, and they have those top 24 guys. So you're already talking about so many more, already talking about an abundance of wide receivers at the positions to go after, when in reality you start two running backs and you start two wide receivers. Yes, you do start a flex, and a lot of people put a wide receiver in that position. Also, a lot of people play in 3 wide receiver leagues. However, for just standard leagues, that's where the positional scarcity comes into play, and there's less elite options, at least in my opinion, at the running back position. I think there's still a lot of really, really, really good options, but there's so few of those elite players at the running back position that if you have them, and even if you have 2, you're set up in such a better position than you would be if you didn't and you waited on your running backs. So as we kind of move into our ranks this year, we're going to go through 24 guys. Now, these ranks were made pre-Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott news. So we'll kind of talk through those as we go through the ranks. But I think that'll be good. I didn't adjust these pre-show, so I think that'll be good to kind of talk through them as we go through. So starting off at number 1, of course, we have Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey, for me, is just the best running back in the NFL, the best all-around running back in the NFL, whether it's receiving, whether it's running on the ground, whether it's team context, whether it's workload context. This guy checks every single box there is. And add to the fact that he got traded from arguably one of the worst teams in the NFL last year to arguably one of the best teams in the NFL last year, from Carolina to San Francisco. It just totally changes his upside. He already had running back 1 upside, but you're talking about how far can he push himself, how far can he push the position in terms of fantasy scoring. So when you talk about Christian McCaffrey, he finished number 2 last year in scoring, total scoring, and if it wasn't for a 42-point week out of Josh Jacobs against Seattle last week, probably would have finished the year as the running back one. I had him as the running back one coming into the year last year, so felt pretty good about that rank. And honestly, he has done nothing to change my mind at all. So I have Christian McCaffrey at number one. Don't need to go into a ton of depth. Now, you may be asking, well, no, if you have him as your number one running back, is he the number one overall pick in fantasy? Now, I don't have the number one pick in any of my leagues this year. However, if I'm staring down that 101 pick and I'm looking at Justin Jefferson, I'm looking at Austin Ekeler, I'm looking at Jamar Chase, I'm looking at Cooper Kupp, I'm looking at Christian McCaffrey, I just have such a hard time at the 101 passing on these elite running backs, whether it be Christian McCaffrey or the next guy I'll get into, Austin Ekeler. You just so rarely get a guy like, and here's the thing, you're going to take, let's say you take Justin Jefferson at number one, your next pick is not until the 212. That is your next pick. And the guys that are going to be going around there are mid-range RB2s or potentially like high-end RB2s. And then you're relying on that guy to overperform to be a running back one. And even if they overperform and become an RB1, if they're like the RB11 or RB10, like, you're kind of not really getting that positional advantage. Maybe you hit and they turn into be a top 5 back, and that's the goal if you take Justin Jefferson. But I just feel like it's so much more likely to find a wide receiver who could pop into that range at the 2-3 turn as opposed to a running back. So that's why I lean Christian McCaffrey as the 101 again this year. Or if you don't like Christian McCaffrey, I still recommend going running back. And in that case, I recommend Austin Ekeler. And he's my number 2 guy in my ranks this year. I actually had Austin Ekeler last year in the league. And through the first 3 weeks, 7, 9, and 5 were his fantasy output points through the first 3 weeks. And you talk about tilting, man. I was absolutely going nuts. I was really concerned over what I was seeing out of Austin Ekeler. I mean, was not getting anything going on the ground. The Chargers in general were struggling. Justin Herbert had just broken his ribs. And what do you know? Austin Ekeler before the bye rips off 28, 31, 14, 24 into the bye and just absolutely carried it from there. Ended up averaging 15.6 fantasy points per game for a total of 265. Honestly, fire up Austin Ekeler. I know he's older. I know he's pushing 30. I know a lot of people get upset, when a running back gets really old and they don't like to rely on those guys. But at the end of the day, if you're in a redraft league, this is 1 year. We're playing 1 year fantasy football. This isn't a dynasty league. This isn't anything like that. This is what can you do for me this year? And honestly, Austin Ekeler in this offense, with this quarterback, with this new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, you're talking about a guy who has the potential to be the number 1 overall player in fantasy. A guy who's got a nose for the end zone, consistently is among the league leader in touchdowns, and that's not always a sticky stat. A lot of times that fluctuates year to year, but when you got a guy like Austin Ekeler who is absolutely yoked up, who's one of the most physical running backs in the league, who is also one of the most elusive, quick, agile running backs in the league, pair him with a ridiculous talent at the quarterback position. You have tons of weapons on the outside in terms of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, new first-round pick, Josh Palmer, and a good group of tight ends. You can't just load the box. So that's where he really excels. And he's also a guy who gets busy in the passing game, so it's not like you can stack the box and expect him to run. You got to cover this guy in the open field. So I think there is a tier for me. Christian McCaffrey and Austin Ekeler are in a tier of their own for me, just because of the all-around aspects of their game in terms of passing, running, team context, and offensive coordinator context. All of those things molded into one. They give you the elite of the elite. And Austin Ekeler finished at 4 last year in terms of total points per game. Didn't miss a single game. Played every single game. Same thing with Christian McCaffrey. And they've just been super consistent. And that's something that I think a lot of people devalue maybe to a sense when someone does it year after year after year after year. They're kind of like, all right, well, it's going to fall off soon. Well, to me, it's like this guy is an anomaly. These two guys, like, everyone says, oh, well, the running backs fall off at a certain point at a certain age. Well, yeah, that's the average running back. You're talking about these guys are the elite of the elite running backs. They can push it a few more years than the average running back could. I have Christian McCaffrey number 1. I have Austin Ekeler number 2. That's my top tier. And either one of those you could take at the 101 for me. If you're in that top 5 range and the wide receivers start to go, I'd be extremely happy taking one of those running backs at maybe 4 or 5, 3, any of those top 5 picks. I'm taking McCaffrey or Ekeler personally. That brings us to my number 3 running back, and this might not be the consensus among the industry, but I have Nick Chubb, Cleveland Browns running back, at the number 3 ranked spot here. I've been talking kind of all preseason about Nick Chubb and how much I like him, how much I like the Browns offense in general. I think they're just absolutely going to take another step forward and really play better than they did down the stretch. Because when Jacoby Brissett was in the lineup last year, they looked good. They weren't super explosive, but it was a very good offense. They were winning some games. And then when Deshaun Watson came back, you could really see a drop-off in overall production from the entire team. I think everyone struggled to keep it going. Deshaun hadn't played in so long, and you could really see that a lot of the guys were struggling to continue their production as, Deshaun Watson got entered back into the fray. And Nick Chubb was no exception. Let's just talk about his fantasy points before the bye. They had a bye in week 9. So he started the year 14, 29, 17, 18, 25, 7, 16, 24. So you're talking about a guy who is averaging in the high teens, has shown production to go way above that into the 20s, and then the bye happens, and out of the bye, 12, 6, 19, 8, 5, 9, 10, 11... you saw the upside kind of go away. Still consistent, was giving you something. Wasn't giving you these stinkers of like 3 or 2 points a game or something like that. Still giving you for the most part, double digits. But really kind of fell off a little bit. Now, I think that he will return to more of that first half Nick Chubb with Deshaun Watson, with another offseason in Cleveland, more reps, more confidence at the quarterback position. I'm a huge Amari Cooper fan. I think he's an absolute stud. They added Elijah Moore, who has draft pedigree, has ability. So we'll see if he can really take the next step forward. Their offensive line is one of the best in football, and that is a major reason why I love Nick Chubb so much. They've always been a run-first team, and Nick Chubb himself is arguably the best running back in terms of on the ground in the NFL. So when you got a guy like that, you got an offense on the rise, in my opinion, and you have weapons on the outside that can't allow you to stack the box, I think that lends itself to an explosive season out of Nick Chubb. He finished the year at number 5 last year with 254 fantasy points, averaged 15 per game. Honestly, I have him ranked at number 3. I think he's gonna be a top 5 back, and he's gonna be one of those super elite, super consistent with upside and a high floor player. And that's all you're looking for. You're looking for that upside. But if you can match that with the floor, I think that's when you get really, really lucky. And I think Nick Chubb is just an absolute stud. There was a number of other question marks in the top 10 that we'll get to as we work through. But with Nick Chubb, I really couldn't find it. The anti-Nick Chubb argument has to be revolving around Deshaun Watson and what he did toward the back end of the year last year. And I just think that he got all that out. He had a full offseason to train again, get back into shape. He's got a full camp as the starter. We talked about this last episode with specifically Deshaun Watson in our quarterback rankings. He was splitting reps with Jacoby Brissett because Jacoby Brissett had to play the first 10 weeks as the starter. So I think you get a full training camp with him as the starter. You get good continuity with him in the offensive line and Nick Chubb, the snap count, all that stuff. I think it'll be a much smoother ride. Are they going to be like the best offense in football? I don't think so, But I do think they're going to be more the first half, more an offense that resembles the first half of the season for them, with the upside of Deshaun Watson, as opposed to the second half of the season and kind of his downside that he showed. So I have Nick Chubb at number 3. And that brings us to number 4 here. That brings us to Bijan Robinson. Yes, I have the rookie as the number 4 running back in fantasy this year. Now, Bijan is one of these generational running backs that gets drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft and is expected to come in and just absolutely carry the load. And while I don't anticipate he's going to get as many carries as maybe Derrick Henry will or Nick Chubb will, I think the explosion that he has, both in terms of the passing game and on the ground, I think is just going to allow himself to be great. And the reason why I do have him so high, even on a bad Atlanta team, is the rate in which the Falcons run. They have the highest percentage of running plays in the National Football League. I believe it was in the high 50s, maybe like 57% of their plays were running plays. And the thing that is the biggest differentiator is when many teams get behind, they'll abandon the run and they'll just start to throw only. Whereas the Falcons lean into it and they just continue to run the football and they continue to establish the ground game. And I think that is such an important thing for Bijan, because he's going to have the trust, the support, and the philosophy backing him, along with the immense talent and around him. Also, Tyler Algier was a really great story last year, late round pick, had 1,000 yards for the Falcons last year. But I think that only helps my point. This guy was a late round pick, showed out, looked really good, but was a guy that still got 1,000 yards, and he's going to be a good complement to Bijan. I don't think Bijan's going to be the overall bell cow and get every single touch. But the fact that Algier was so successful last year, I think that lends itself to Bijan having a very, very healthy year. Still getting spelled by Tyler Algier, but I think Bijan will be an absolute monster this year. I have the number 6 pick in almost every single league I'm in this year. If Bijan's there at number 6, he's a serious consideration for me there. Mid-first round is where I could see him going. Sometimes he falls to the back half of the first, and in that case, I'm pouncing right away. If I could pair him with a guy like Davante Adams or Stephon Diggs, you're talking about a home run start to your draft. So I have Bijan at number 4. Number 5, I have Saquon Barkley. Yes, Saquon's indeed. Saquon last year ended up finishing as the running back 6 in fantasy scoring. Was in the news all off season because of his contract discussions with the Giants, and that ended up getting resolved. He ended up getting a little bit extra money and signing a 1-year deal. Still going to be a free agent next year. However, this guy is just as consistent as they come. He averaged 14 points per game last year. Put up 227 points. Only missed week 18, but they were a playoff team, so it wasn't really, they didn't want to push him and maybe risk him not being there in the playoffs. So, and even in the playoffs against the Vikings, absolutely showed out. Was the best player on the field for the Giants. So I have him at number 5. In terms of the offense in general, they're gonna need to rely on him again, and that's why I think you can be so comfortable taking him, because they bring in Darren Waller, who I think now is going to be the number 1 target on the team. They didn't really do much to the wide receiver position. They have Hyatt still, Sterling Shepard. I believe they brought in Cole Beasley, like Wan'Dale Robinson. They have all these like slot receivers and a couple deep threats in terms of Hyatt. And Darren Waller's just going to feast with all these targets, but like their offense is going to run through Saquon Barkley, and that's what you're looking for in your RB1 in fantasy, being the focal point of your offense. And I think that Saquon is that. He is going to be a top 5 back again, pending injury. That's the only thing that I think can really take him out. Daniel Jones showed a number of strides last year in terms of his development, earned a big contract. I think a lot of that was due to the work that Saquon was doing. So I think they're going to lean into that. Brian Dable, second year in New York, is going to just really be a little bit more comfortable and get into his own a little bit more. And I think he's just going to be right there again. Pretty much going to be as consistent as they come. Definitely worth a first round pick. So here is where it gets interesting in my ranks. I had Tony Pollard at number 6, Jonathan Taylor at number 7, and Josh Jacobs at number 8. Now, Jonathan Taylor has since reported back to camp, still nursing the ankle injury, but I believe he should be hopefully healthy by the start of the season. And they also have granted his agent permission to go seek a trade. So that is going to be very, very interesting to see potentially where he lands if he does get traded. I don't think he does. I think he's going to be in Indy the entire year. However, he will be reporting back to camp. And then Josh Jacobs is going to report to camp as well and should be there for week 1. So that is going to change things. For me here, I think I am going to flip Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard. So I'm going to have Josh Jacobs as my number 6 running back. And let's just talk about Jacobs for a second here. The only reason I had him at number 8 initially was because of the holdout. But the play on the field last year did nothing to warrant that. He was the running back 1 last year in fantasy. He did have a decent amount of single-digit games. You talk about 8, 9, 5, 8. 5 again, 5 in week 18, but he did have so many blow-up games that it made up 29, 25, 33, 42, like I mentioned earlier, and then still mixed in consistent games throughout the course of the season, 16, 16, 19, 17, 15. So this is a guy that was an absolute stud last year. It was going in the mid-rounds and ended up finishing as the running back 1. Now it's going to be a season of change in Vegas. New quarterback, Derek Carr, is no longer with the Raiders after spending his entire career there. They're bringing in Jimmy G. Jimmy Garoppolo will be the new starting quarterback for the team. They obviously traded away Darren Waller, so they do not have his production at the tight end position anymore. And I feel like Jimmy Garoppolo and Derek Carr are similar quarterbacks. And because of that, I think that the external factors, the off-the-field factors, could bring their offense back a little bit. Because I think they're similar quarterbacks, right? So I think the production is going to be similar. I mean, I think Derek Carr throws the deep ball much better than Jimmy Garoppolo, but Jimmy Garoppolo is probably much more technical in the short to medium range passing. So when you talk about that, what changes? Well, you have a new quarterback under center, a guy who's been dealing with some injury last year. He obviously missed the end of the season, most of the season last year with that shoulder injury. You have Davante Adams, who was a big fan of Derek Carr and is a little bit upset now that they got rid of him. You have Josh Jacobs, who's been holding out, and now he will report to camp. But you just have a lot of like drama going on almost with the Raiders, and I think that going into a season, it can maybe hinder the production. Honestly, overall, I think Josh McDaniels as the play caller, he didn't really feel like he was doing a phenomenal job last year, but overall, Josh Jacobs had a great year. Davante Adams had a great year. Derek Carr looked good. They did well as a team, but there's just something holding me back on the Raiders. And that's where I think Josh Jacobs deserves to probably be a top 5 back. But there's just so many external factors here for me that I think it just knocks him down just a little bit for me. And that's why I did move him up from where I initially had him, but he is just outside that top 5 right for me at number 6. And then I'm going to keep actually Jonathan Taylor at number 7, and he is going to be the next guy we'll talk about here. Jonathan, 2 years ago, or coming into last season, was arguably the number 1 pick in terms of average draft position, and now he's going, well outside that, number 21 overall. So almost 2 full rounds later, and on a worse team, to just be quite honest. They're going to be starting a rookie quarterback in terms of Anthony Richardson. Their wide receivers, they don't have a ton that scares you. Their tight ends aren't overly crazy. Their offensive line has always been a work in progress. But you're talking about a guy in Jonathan Taylor who was one of the best pure talents in the league fighting through an ankle injury last year, still was productive. I mean, he had the 24 points in the first week, kind of struggled a little bit, hurt, got missed 2 games, came back, had 8 points and then 5.6. I believe he left that game again. Missed another game. Then he comes back 22, 13, 15, 10. Then they have the bye. And then he comes out again and gets hurt in week 15 and misses the rest of the season. And he's still nursing that ankle injury, which is really worrying me. I don't like to take guys that have these injury question marks. Like I don't coming into the year. Like, this is why I'm struggling so much with Cooper Kupp, because I absolutely love the player, but he's got that hamstring already coming into the year. Jonathan Taylor, you would have assumed after a full off season, the ankle would be healed, but it's not. And he's still dealing with it. Now, maybe he's just saying that to, continue his holdout and all that stuff. But, I think there's something there. And I think that he hasn't even hit the field when he came back. We'll see if he does come back and what kind of participation level it could be. I think the only thing that is detracting from Jonathan Taylor right now, 2 things, is A, the injury, and B, the team context. Everything else is on par with the top running backs, the top 5, top tier. But that is just something that differentiates it. And that's why I have him pushed down just a little bit to that number 7 spot, when if all else was equal, all else in a vacuum, he would, he could be easily in the top 3, be in that top tier with Austin Ekeler and Christian McCaffrey. All right, now let's get to Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard has been in the shadow of Ezekiel Elliott his entire career. Always people have been banging the drum to give Tony Pollard more and more touches, and last year he absolutely broke out. He was the number 8 running back in fantasy, even with Zeke playing every single game, missing 2 games last season. Tony Pollard just showed how explosive he was. He had a couple 30-point fantasy finishes, a couple 20-pointers, but also showed his, volatility. Had a game with 0.8 fantasy points, 2.2, 5.2, 6.1. So he showed kind of that floor and that ceiling at the same time. Still averaged 13 points, broke the 200 fantasy point barrier, and is the bell cow now. Dallas let Ezekiel Elliott go. They really didn't bring anybody else in. They brought in Ronald Jones, but he will be dealing with a suspension coming into the year this year. So, that's where, you're excited. But they also lost Kellen Moore as their offensive coordinator. So that is, a little question mark, because Kellen Moore was one of the fastest offensive coordinators in the league. He liked to play extremely fast, got a lot of plays in. But I really like Tony Pollard this year. I think he's going to be very, very good. I think he's definitely going to be in the running back 1 consideration. I'm interested to see what his touches look like. I'm interested to see how he holds up throughout the course of a season. And the offensive line in Dallas is good. They have a good offense. Like, everything is looking very, very good for them. A lot of continuity with the team. So all things that you like there. Also a guy with extreme athleticism and explosion to really step up and be one of those extreme playmakers. So, I just think that the frame and potential for wear down is why I have him down at number 8. But talent-wise, he is talented enough to be in that top 5 consideration. And if he finished in the top 5 this year, wouldn't be surprised at all. I think he's one of those guys who, if you take a wide receiver in the first round and come back around and get Tony Pollard in the second, you're going to have potential to have a really, really explosive team. But you do kind of need to understand the risk involved and understand where, the downside could potentially be with Tony Pollard. Although, like I said, I think he is an absolute freak and one of the best running backs in the league. All right, let's go to number 9 here. We have Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, bell cow himself. Derrick Henry finished last year as the number 3 running back in the league, and just continued to do what he does. He started the year a little bit slow. People were worried. He had 8-8, so still not terrible, but was struggling a little bit coming into the year, and then just absolutely turned up in terms of fantasy points in every game. 20, 20, 25, then he had to buy 13, 34, 23, 6, 23, 11, 3, 17, 22, 16. So, the thing with Derrick Henry is he's not as active in the passing game, and when he doesn't score a touchdown and when he's a little inefficient on the ground, he's prone to those 6-point weeks. He's prone for those, 19 carries for 42 yards or 21 carries for 52 yards or something like that and no touchdown. And that's the weeks that, Derrick Henry kind of struggles. But he is just so consistent in terms of his workload, in his physicality, like in everything about him. Screams bell cow RB1. And even last year, maybe some would say an up and down year, still finishes the running back 3, averaged 16.9 fantasy points per game. That was the highest average fantasy points per game out of any running back in the entire league. He scored 269 fantasy points, so he was right there in consideration for the top back in the league. I even considered moving him up a little bit. Honestly, I would, looking at it now, I might even take him over Jonathan Taylor just based on the certainty of what we know with Derrick Henry in the same offense and the same offense that relies on him. Minimal injury history, at least right now. He came off the foot injury last year and played pretty much the whole year. Even on a team that started losing in the back half of the season, still contributed fantasy points. Derrick Henry he's a guy who some people are able to pair as their second running back. And if you can get a running back and have Derrick Henry as your second, I think that's just an absolute stud stack. And toward the back half of the first round, you could do a lot worse than having Derrick Henry as your RB2. And, a lot of people are worried about how many these carries, if they're taking a toll. Like I said with Nick Chubb, we play 1 year in redraft fantasy football, and I'm not worried about the cliff this year. I have seen no signs of decline. Now, maybe this year he shows some signs of decline, and then in the draft season next year, we'll have to reconsider it. However, as of now, I don't see that fall off, and I don't see where it's coming from, because the offense in general is running through him, and like the team in general, they still have Ryan Tannehill. A big reason that I think that he could continue this as well too, especially with the loss of AJ Brown last year and all that stuff, is they go out and they signed DeAndre Hopkins, so they get a bona fide, respected wide receiver on the outside. Even if it's just one, it's enough to take just one extra guy out of the box for Derrick Henry, and sometimes that's all he needs. And an underrated part of Derrick Henry is even when they stack the box, sometimes that lends itself to more explosive plays, because if you can break through that line of defense, there's no one there stopping him. And there's very, very few people in the NFL who can stop him one-on-one in the open field. So I have Derrick Henry at number 9. And honestly, it's going to be a great value there. I just like the upside of some other guys a little bit more than him. Number 10, I have Joe Mixon. Now, this guy had a very up and down year last year. We talked about him a lot in the audit series. He was pretty consistent, didn't have any games over 20 points except for his one game where he had 51 fantasy points. He has 51 fantasy points. But other than that, he didn't crack 15. So, that's where it gets the conundrum with Joe Mixon is kind of tough here. But the reason there's optimism, for the Joe Mixon truthers, is he still finished as the running back 13, largely on the back of that 51 fantasy points. However, Samaje Perine, who was a consistent thorn in the side of Joe Mixon, is no longer there. He's in Denver now, and they really didn't sign someone who could. They didn't really sign someone who could fill that role. They have some young guys, some unproven guys behind him, and then also he was in a little bit of a contract dispute, and he said, "Listen, I'm going to take less money because I want to stay here. I want to have a chance to win a Super Bowl. I want other guys around me to get paid too." So I think the humility of taking less money, and also the team being like, "All right, listen, we appreciate that. We're giving you the rock. You're our guy, and we're not really going to take you off the field much." I think his passing upside increases. The offense in general is just absolutely monstrous. Zach Taylor, their head coach, always has a soft spot for the run as well, so he's always going to make sure Joe Mixon gets his carries. I think his upside's going to be a little bit higher this year, and he's always a guy with a consistent floor too. I said, he didn't crack 15 points last year, but at the same time, he was giving you 14, 13, 12, 15, 8, 10, 10. That's not great. He's a lot better as your RB2, but you have a guy in an RB2 when you take him This is a guy that's going 36th overall, the 11th running back off the board. If you can get him as your second running back, you have a guy that has the explosion to be an RB1 any given week, along with the guy you took in the first round or the second round that can be your true RB1. And that leads us to number 11 here. I have Rhamondre Stevenson at number 11, and now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to make another live change. We're going to have Najee Harris at number 11 here. Najee Harris, I'm going to move him up one spot. I had him at 12. I'm going to have him now at number 11. I just love everything about Najee Harris. Last year coming into the league, 2 years ago coming into the league, first round pick, and was an absolute beast. Okay, you know what? I have been an absolute dud here. I have been referencing standard scoring. I don't know what I've been doing. This whole episode, I've been talking standard instead of PPR. That has definitely altered some rankings here. Regardless, side note, Austin Ekeler is number 1, Christian McCaffrey number 2, Josh Jacobs number 3, Derrick Henry number 4, Nick Chubb number 6. Pretty much everything else similar after that. Nobody else is really too different. Some specific numbers of scoring are going to be a little bit different. However, for the most part, all similar. Austin Ekeler also led in average fantasy points per game. Derrick Henry was still very, very good. All right, in terms of specific numbers, you can scratch some of that stuff. So, all right, well, now we're in the PPR scoring. Now I can actually look out. But Najee Harris, as a rookie, was the number 3 running back in fantasy scoring, in PPR scoring. And then coming into the year last year, he suffered a foot injury and decided to play through it. And I think that really hurt his efficiency. And he really struggled early in the year. But then you saw after the bye, I think he really started to get it going. Pittsburgh offense in general started to get it going. And you really saw a guy, get back into the guy who we saw during his rookie year. And I think in year two of what am I trying to say here? Year 2 of the Kenny Pickett experiment, year 2 of this offense. George Pickens hopefully comes into his own a little bit more. Deontay Johnson still looks really, really good. They go out and they signed Allen Robinson, so they have a good group of wide receivers. Pat Freiermuth at the tight end position, so they have a lot of good weapons on the outside. They can't necessarily stack the box a ton. I think he's going to be really, really good this year. I like him. I wouldn't be mad if you're going wide receivers early and then you take Najee Harris as your running back 1. He's going currently as this is PPR scoring. Even my ADP was off a little bit. Najee Harris going as the 28th overall player, the 10th running back off the board. So, you're talking about if you have that number 1 overall pick and you go Justin Jefferson and then you come back around and you go, I don't know, DK Metcalf or something like that, and then you take Najee Harris, maybe he's your RB1. Honestly, in that scenario, I'm not upset about that because you got a guy who is really going to get the ball. Obviously, Jaylen Warren is something to think about in terms of a true foil to him. However, he is still the lead guy, and Mike Tomlin loves that. He loves having that established number 1. And, he's active in the passing game as well. Let's not forget that. He's got hands, very elusive, strong in the running game. And as long as he's healthy coming into the year, I think he's going to hit the ground running. And he's really going to be an issue for all these teams trying to stop the Steelers, because I think Kenny Pickett's going to take a step forward. I think their wide receivers are going to take a step forward. Their offense in general was just absolutely abysmal last year. So I think all that is going to take kind of a step forward. And his fantasy numbers should follow suit. So that's going to bring me to number 12 now. And number 12, I have Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is my number 12, the last running back 1 here. There's nothing about Aaron Jones that I don't like. He's everything you want in a running back. He catches the ball. He runs the ball. He's got touchdown upside. He was the number 9 running back in fantasy last year. They paid him a contract, so he's up there. He's the 38th player off the board and the 15th running back off the board. He's going behind some guys that he frankly is going to outscore easily. And I think he's going to be a running back 1 again. I think that with the continuity of their offense. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is no longer there. Jordan Love is stepping in. But I think with the move to Jordan Love, they're going to rely on Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon even more. They didn't bring in any wide receivers to compete with, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. They even took wide receivers away in terms of Allen Lazard and those guys. So I think when you look at that, Aaron Jones is going to be on the field all the time. He's going to be involved in the passing game even when A.J. Dillon's on the field. And when they get in close, Aaron Jones is prone to scoring touchdowns. He's got the upside to score 28 in a week, 23. 32, but at the same time has a very consistent floor and really, really consistent numbers in that respect too. I think he gets consistently overlooked. He's just lost in the fray a little bit, but I think he is going to be one of the true steals of the draft this year, especially in these mid rounds. A guy who, if the touchdowns come his way, could easily break into the top 8, top 7, 8, 9, and be that guy. So I'm going to move him up to 12. And so that's going to be the top 12 running backs that I have. We're going to try to move a little quicker through the back half of the top 24. And number 13, we're going to have Rhamondre Stevenson. Now, the discussion about Rhamondre Stevenson starts with Ezekiel Elliott joining the fray. Zeke last year was the running back 22 in terms of fantasy scoring. Really good on the goal line for Dallas. But Rhamondre Stevenson was a stud. He was the number 7 running back in fantasy last year, scored 14.7 points per game. And after James White went down last year, they had a number of guys that were struggling. Najee Harris was hurt at times last year. He was just carrying the load for New England, and I think he will continue to do so. I think his touchdown upside takes a hit with Zeke joining. But at the same time, I think that he's still going to be the number 1, and he's still going to be the primary pass catching back. They actually have a real offensive coordinator in New England, not Matt Patricia, masquerading as the offensive coordinator. Bill O'Brien's there, so I expect them to play a little bit faster. Hopefully, Mac Jones is playing with a little bit more confidence, and Rhamondre's still a very, very good running back. I just wouldn't feel comfortable with him as my 1. A little bit more comfortable with him as my 2. Number 14, I have Travis Etienne. This is a guy who I was very, very excited about last year, and he looked really good. Struggled at times early and then a little bit later. He was the number 17 running back last year. Really got it going in the middle of the year and then kind of struggled a little bit and then got it back going in time for the fantasy playoffs. So I expect more of the same this year. I expect Jacksonville to take another big step forward with Trevor Lawrence, with Calvin Ridley joining the offense, with Christian Kirk another year there, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram another year there. They added Tank Bigsby, who is a real player. He's going to be a thorn in the side of Travis Etienne, but at the same time, I think it'll be good for him just to kind of get a guy to spell him at times and allow him to continue to be fresh and continue to carry his burst deep into the game and deep into the season. So I have him at number 14. Number 15, I have Jahmyr Gibbs. And Jahmyr Gibbs, I am very, very excited about this year. Kind of all the reasons I was excited about DeAndre Swift last year, minus the injuries. And that's really it, because Jahmyr Gibbs right now is going as the number 14 running back, 35th overall, right in between Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones. I think he's in that Aaron Jones mold. He's going to get a ton of catches. He's going to be definitely a passing downs back. They did go out and they signed David Montgomery, so the goal line might not be there. Early down works may necessarily be there, but he's one injury away from being a top 6 back, and getting all the work. Even regardless of that, independent of that, he is going to be a high-end running back too, and with the potential any given week of being an RB1, much like I was talking about with Joe Mixon, a guy you can get as your RB2, but consistently has upside to be a running back 1 in a given week. I think everybody's excited about Detroit and their potential this year in the NFC North. So there's just nothing not to like. They drafted him number 12 overall. Let's not forget Bijan Robinson, going as the 4th running back, 9th overall, was the number 8 pick in the draft, and Jahmyr Gibbs was the number 12 pick, who the Lions were desperately trying to acquire Jahmyr Gibbs in the draft last year. So I think he's going to have a huge role in the team. Their offensive line is getting better and better and better. Jared Goff is a very, very competent quarterback, loves having a good running game, and with the thunder and lightning of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, It's going to keep Jahmyr Gibbs fresh. Him and Gibbs and Etienne I kind of view as like a very similar player, almost like the same player. Obviously, Etienne's the starter, and Gibbs is probably the number 2 on his team. But they both play a similar role and both have extreme explosion. So I kind of view them in the same light there. Number 16, I have Javonte Williams. And this one was kind of interesting because we weren't really sure of his health, and yet he's playing in preseason games already, especially last year after tearing his knee up and just really struggling. He's back, and he's playing a preseason game, which means he should be pretty darn healthy. And last year, I was extremely high on him. If I can look real quick where I had him, I had Javonte Williams at number 11 last year in my running back rank. So I had him as a running back 1. This year I have him at 16, mainly just because of the injury. But I expect Denver to be better this year than they were last year. I know I was all in on Denver last year, but I expect them to be much better. I expect them to be much, much better. Now, Javonte Williams' ADP is extremely low right now, 28 running back and number 71 overall. This is moving up because of his recent health news, but he's a guy you can get much later in your draft because of the ADP and how it's baked in, and he could be a legit running back 2 for you, even has potential any given week to be running back 1. So he's a guy you can maybe get as your running back 3. I just did in a draft I did on Saturday, and I feel good about that. I think that he can really be, like, I have Chubb and Kenneth Walker who have the same bye week, and that week, Javonte's going to be my number 1 running back, and do I feel nervous about that? No, because I know he can perform at that level. I think Sean Payton in that offense, they went out and they addressed the offensive line. I think Sean Payton has Russell Wilson in check. They have great weapons on the outside, and I think that they're really going to lean into their running game. They did add Samaje Perine, so that is kind of the thorn that Joe Mixon had in his side last year, but I think that's more to keep Javonte fresh, and in his touches, Javonte should be very, very explosive. So I have him at number 16. Number 17, I have Alexander Mattison. Now, Alexander Mattison has always been the handcuff you draft late in your draft because Dalvin Cook's going to miss a couple games, and you're going to have a running back 1 in those weeks with Alexander Mattison. Finally, he's now the guy in Minnesota, and everyone's kind of like, I'm good, which is really, really interesting. Even me, I have him at number 17. When he starts, everyone's like, he's a top 12 back. I think in general, they're going to be more of a throwing team because their defense is going to be pretty bad this year. So I think that Alexander Mattison is still going to get a ton of work. He's going to be involved in the passing game. But I just think that, it's just not going to quite be the upside that Dalvin Cook possessed because of the passing work and because of the defense in general. I think they'll be there. So he's going as the number 23 running back off the board and number 66 player overall. So I have him higher than his ADP even now. And that just kind of goes to show you what the market thinks about him, even with his new presumed starter status. So I have him at number 17. Number 18, I have Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, I really, really liked last year. Funny enough, I actually traded Alexander Mattison in the preseason for Kenneth Walker. Remember last year he was coming in with a hernia injury, so he was kind of suppressed in ADP. Rashad Penny was kind of the guy going ahead of him. It was a little bit of what's going to happen here. And then once Rashad Penny went down, Kenneth Walker absolutely took off. Let's see if I can get his scoring. He finished as a running back 18 on the year. He missed the first week of the season, kind of struggled to get going. And then from week 5 on, I think Rashad Penny went down in week 6. So Kenneth Walker from week 5 on, 14, 19, 28, 12, 27, 13, by 16. He got hurt in week 13, only at 3.6. Meek missed week 14, and then he went 11, 12, 15, 13 to end the year. So a guy with home run ability to get all the way to the end zone. He had a run against the Chargers. I think that was 70 yards or something. But also a guy who's very, very elusive and able to carry the ball a lot. Now, they did draft Zach Charbonnet in the draft this year. I believe he was a 3rd-round pick. Might have been a 2nd-round pick, but I think it was a 3rd-round pick. He is also a real player, and they're going to use him a decent amount. He's going to be in that Kenneth Walker role or he might be a little bit. Regardless, they're going to be a 1A and 1B kind of complement, but I do think the explosion of Kenneth Walker, the offense in general. I really like Seattle's offense, their offensive line. I think all of those combinations, even with Charbonnet taking some carries away, maybe taking some targets away, I think Kenneth Walker is still going to be a very, very good running back too, with the explosion to finish as, you got 28, 27, to be a high-end running back one on any given week. So in the one league I was just mentioned that my draft I just had, I took Nick Chubb in the first round, and then my next two running backs were Kenneth Walker and Javonte Williams. And that depth I feel like is very, very good. The upside I have is very, very good. And also the floor I feel I have covered with the guys that I took. So I really, really like Kenneth Walker. He is going ADP-wise. Let's talk where he's going here. Kenneth Walker, he's going as the 18th running back off the board, 45th overall, so pretty much right where I have him. I think that's just a really, really fair value there. Number 19, Breece Hall. Very interesting player to rank here, coming off the ACL injury. He's back in camp, back practicing. They go out and they sign Dalvin Cook, so you're expecting some carries to come away from him. He's the number 16 running back off the board, number 40 overall. And in his games last year, Breece Hall went, where was he at here? Come on. Breece Hall, he went 10, 13, 15, 15, 27, 20. And then in the game he got hurt, he had a 50-yard touchdown and he had 13 points. So he was absolutely explosive last year, missed the rest of the season. I think the addition of Dalvin Cook isn't really going to hurt him to the point where he's like undraftable or he's not going to be what he was last year. I mean, he's going as the 16th running back off the board. I have him at 19 because I do think Dalvin Cook is going to be early in the year, especially much more involved. And I think that as the season goes on, Breece Hall will get more and more involved in the team. So when you have that kind of compliment, I think it's going to help both of the guys. I don't even have Dalvin Cook ranked in my top 24, but we're going to have a discussion about that. But Breece Hall was so explosive last year, was such a monster that I think he's going to be extremely, extremely utilized. This is a team I think that really wants to run the ball, although they have Aaron Rodgers now and Garrett Wilson on the outside. I think this is a team that wants to lean on the run and then, really allow these guys also to get active in the passing game. They've showed Breece Hall split out wide in some instances and in training camp and, trying to catch the ball too. So I have him at 19, but definitely has upside to outproduce that rank. I have Cam Akers at 20 here. And now this one, I might be higher. I got to check the ADP right now where Cam Akers is going. Cam Akers is going number 22, 62nd overall. So I'm a little bit higher than consensus. The main reason I have him here at 20 is because they just don't really have anybody else. And I think the offense will be much better last year. The offensive line is coming into the year much healthier than it was. Matt Stafford is healthy. Cooper Kupp is back. We think going to be healthy week 1. I'm excited about Van Jefferson this year. Tyler Higbee is a very good tight end. And Cam Akers was just the guy last year. Toward the back half of the year, he, starting in week 13 when they really committed to him again, he went 19, 9, 13, 34, 14, 15. So when they finally decided to give him the ball, he produced. And this was what we were excited about last year. Let me see his ADP coming into the year last year. If I can even get that. Of course, they're not going to let me switch back to that. So I just think bottom line, when it comes down to Cam Akers, this is a guy who's the undisputed RB1 on his team. I think a better offense than it was last year. And even then, when they gave him the ball, and this was with Baker Mayfield, he was consistently producing. So I think when you have a guy like that going as a running back 22, 62nd overall, this is a guy who you could take, a running back 1 and then just load up on wide receivers, or load up on wide receivers and then get this guy as your second running back. I think you'll be more than okay with that. So I have Cam Akers number 22. I have James Conner at number 21. James Conner, on arguably the worst team in the NFL, is going 21 out of running back, 61st overall. James Conner still was where was he at? Number 19 in terms of fantasy running backs last year on a dumpster fire of a team. And that was with missing 3 games. He averaged 15.4 fantasy points per game. That was better than guys like Najee Harris, Miles Sanders, Alvin Kamara, Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, all these guys, Jerick McKinnon, Ezekiel Elliott. After he came back from injury, really, really consistent scoring, 11, 23, 13, 21, by 23, 18, 25, 14, and they missed week 18. But I think when you pair a guy like this that they don't really have much competition with him, the team is going to be absolutely atrocious. They're going to be throwing almost all the time, every single game. And early in the games when they are running, it will be James Conner. Around the goal line, it's going to be James Conner. He's a more than capable pass catcher. So I think he is a good guy to target, especially like I mentioned with Cam Akers. If you're loading up on wide receivers early, he's a guy that's going to catch the ball late. And he's, he has touchdown upside even though the team sucks. I think when they do get in touchdown range, it's going to be a guy like James Conner. So I have him as a back end running back too. And I think that's fair. I think he doesn't deserve to be outside the top 24. But he does, have upside capped because of the team situation. This one might surprise some people, but I have James Cook at number 22. I'm buying stock. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on James Cook and what he's selling. Now, this is a guy who, let me see if I can even find him on this scoring sheet. He was the 44th running back in terms of fantasy scoring last year. So, really was a rookie last year for the Bills. Really wasn't doing anything. Now, this is a guy that's going 30th at the running back position and 78th overall. I have him at 22. I think he is going to be the lead back for this team. Even though they go out and they sign Damian Harris, the ADP is telling us that James Cook is the guy, and he's in this kind of ambiguous running back room, and I think that he is the most talented back. He's the youngest. He's the most explosive. He's showing strides in pass protection, which I think is crucial, especially for a Buffalo Bills offense that throws the ball a ton. He has capable hands out of the backfield. This is a guy who I think could vastly outperform this. If there's a guy outside the top 20 that I think could jump into maybe the top 15, it's this guy. It's James Cook. And I think that, people might not think that. And I think a lot of people maybe are kind of picking him as their trendy pick there, but it's not like I have him at 15 or whatever, but I think he's going to be really, really solid. They got rid of Devin Singletary, so I think James Cook is really going to step into that role. Do you expect Damian Harris to still be involved? Obviously, around the goal line, Josh Allen's always liable to just run it in himself, but I think that James Cook is going to be on the field, and they're talking him up. I mean, Josh Allen's talking him up in camp, how explosive he's going to be, how much of a part of the offense he's going to be, and I think when your quarterback, your franchise quarterback says that carries a lot of weight as opposed to the offense coordinator saying, yeah, he's going to be a big part of the offense or whatever like that. It's like, he's not the one making the decisions. The guy with the ball in his hand, Josh Allen's the one making the decisions. And if he's saying that, he's going to be a big part of the offense, we're going to trust him with a lot of different things. I believe that. So I think he's going to be really, really good there. And I have him at 22. 23, I have David Montgomery. Now, this guy, is just going to be a super solid running back 2, I think. Low-end running back 2. He's going as number 31 running back off the board, 83rd overall. He's just going to be super, super, super solid. But if Jahmyr Gibbs gets healthy, if he gets hurt, the same argument I made for Jahmyr Gibbs. If Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, David Montgomery is going to be pushing running back 1 status because he's already going to have the goal line work. He's shown that he's a capable pass catcher. He's healthy coming into the year, and Dan Campbell has shown that when something's working, he'll stick with it, a la Jamal Williams last year on the goal line. So if David Montgomery continues to produce, he's going to continue to get the ball on a team we expect to be good, on a team that plays inside a dome, so it's not like the weather is going to be a huge issue, on a team with a good offensive line. I think he's one of the best insurance policies you can get, while at the same time holding standalone value in terms of being a goal line back on a good team, and probably still going to be the starter in terms of carries-wise on the ground for Detroit. So I have him at number 23. Number 24, I have Rachaad White. This is going to be my last running back in the top 24. A lot of people really like Rachaad White. He's going as the 24th, back off the board, 65th overall. I don't know. I like Rachaad White. I really do. I don't know. The offense in general just kind of scares me. I am excited to see what he does being the lead back. I think that he kind of surprised some people last year in terms of some of his scoring. They didn't really have tape on him. He was obviously a rookie behind Leonard Fournette, and it kind of surprised some people. I'm trying to see where he ended up finishing last year because he played most of the year. But I am struggling to find where he finished. Regardless, he's the guy now. And I think that is, cannot be understated. He's still going to be very, very involved. He's going to be involved in the passing game. This team's going to be behind, so he's going to be in the passing game. He was 36th overall in terms of in terms of running back scoring. Toward the back half of the year, really got more consistent after their bye, 19, 16, 10, 5, 15, 9.8. So it really got a little bit more consistent. I just think his upside's capped in the same way with James Conner. I think those two are very similar players. Maybe not in terms of age or, the way they play, but in terms of the role they're going to be occupying, the team context they're going to be playing on. I could just see all those playing a factor to him kind of playing in that back half of running back 2 molds. Does he have the upside to be higher? Of course. He's a young player, second-year running back. On a bad team that's going to be expected to throw a lot. So I could see the upside there, but I think, he'll kind of settle in that back half of the top 24. Whew. All right, that's going to wrap up our top 24. But as always, there's names outside the top 24 that we need to talk about. Last year, let me see if I can pull up the thing just to see some guys I had outside the top 24 there. I had Tony Pollard outside the top 24 last year. Miles Sanders outside the top 24 last year. So there's definitely going to be guys outside that you can look at and see, guys that are going to step up. So some guys I have outside: J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, Isaiah Pacheco. I have Alvin Kamara outside there. The 3 Miami backs: Dameon Pierce, Jerick McKinnon, all these guys. Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. Honestly, I think Dalvin Cook is a top 24 back. I'd probably put him over Rachaad White. Probably put him over Dave Montgomery. I'd probably put him right next to his family, James Cook. I'd probably put him right next to him, honestly, in terms of production there. Him and Breece Hall, I think, are going to have similar outputs. J.K. Dobbins, the injury just scares me. He hasn't really shown that he's been able to fully recover from it. I think Baltimore is going to turn into more of a passing offense as well, so I'm not really loving that. Miles Sanders goes from probably the best team in the NFL to one of the worst teams in the NFL in Carolina, so I don't really think he's going to be able to put up the same numbers that he did last year. I mean, he was running back 15 last year? Even that still was extremely volatile on one of the better teams in the league. So I think that'll be a little questionable. Alvin Kamara, I have no idea what to do with. I think he is one of the better running backs that we've seen over the last decade. But at the same time, just last year, he just didn't look like the same guy at points. Had some games where he had a 42-point game, so he blew up. But then, had some games where it was single digits. It was still, he averaged 14. He finished as the 16th running back on the board, so he's still good. I just don't know what to make of. I feel like everyone's so down on him, and he's obviously going to be suspended for the first 3 weeks, but Derek Carr's there. You should think, better offense. I just maybe maybe this is the guy I'm just missing on this year, but he's going to be right outside that top 24 for me. Zeke, I'm just not really thinking about. He'll be a fine goal line back, a good bye week replacement, but I'm not really relying on him to be one of my top 2 running backs in that sense. I don't want to forget about Jerick McKinnon because I think he's going to be a good late round pick that is going to be viable week to week in the flex. So I don't want people to forget about him. Along with Isaiah Pacheco, they kind of go hand in hand. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting. Zach Charbonnet is a good late guy to pick up in terms of there. A.J. Dillon I have in this one as well. If Aaron Jones go down, A.J. Dillon is going to be, a top 24 back easily, probably pushing top 12. So I think that's a good conversation to have there, and I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up our ranks this year. I think that all these guys are extremely effective in what they do. I think it was good to kind of not touch these for a couple weeks and now come back to it and start to think about some things in terms of there. I just want to change one thing there. This one's going to be 11, and then Aaron Jones is going to be 12. And yeah, so we'll see kind of how we play out with that. As always, next season we're going to be coming back to this exact set of rankings and talking about them, and we'll figure out from there. But that is going to wrap up the episode today. Once again, check the description below for all our social media handles. Feel free to shoot us any questions, especially anything fantasy related or any sports, anything in that nature, and we'll answer it on the show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again next time.